Welcome to the Stephen Rimmer podcast. Today we've got Richard Martin from New Era Mortgages and Patricia George from our Family Law Department. And we're going to be talking about divorce and finances. So, Patricia, what options are available if one partner wanted to buy another out of the family home?
But basically, if the parties have a mortgage in place, and it depends on how much the mortgage is and what the price of the property is. So if you've got a property that's worth $1 million and you've got 750,000 on the in relation to the mortgage, that wife may not be, I'm going to say wife because it's usually the wife who wants to stay in the property, if she cannot afford to continue to refinance or stay in the property.
Keep up the mortgage payments.
To keep up the mortgage payments or transfer it into her sole name, then the property is going to have to be sold. However, if she is in a position to do so, she'll either refinance, is that correct?
That's right.
Refinance, or she will get an existing, refinance the existing mortgage, or she will get a new mortgage in her own name. So it depends on her income. And then she's also got to ensure that she can afford that. And that's where she goes along to our lovely mortgage advisor to get that information.
And that's just like a normal mortgage, is it? So they look at income.
It is a normal mortgage. They just have to remember that if she wants to remain in the property, she's got to take over the existing mortgage and as well as borrow more for any settlement agreement. So in your example, it won't be 750,000, it'll be 750 plus. So she's going to have a bigger mortgage on only a single income, and that's where it gets difficult.
Yes,
difficult decisions have to be made.
But yes, she needs to be able to buy out that.
Yeah, how does that work then? Those conversations when they're sort of agreeing how to split up assets.
How is it?
Yeah, it must be really difficult.
Of course it is. Yeah. It's going to be very emotional.
Yeah.
Wife has got the children, wants to stay in the property. Husband wants his money so that he can move on with the new missus. Some people aren't realistic about that they can actually stay in the property. And then you're having to say, well, how are you going to fund this? Sometimes it is possible with spousal maintenance from the other party if they are earning enough to give you spousal maintenance. And if because obviously what we look at is their income and their outgoings, and if there's a shortfall, what that income what we need from our husband in order to cover that, and that may require them paying the mortgage.
And does that spousal maintenance, can you include that in your income when you're making those assessments about borrowing?
Yes, sometimes with some lenders. It depends whether it's court ordered. With some lenders, they prefer court ordered spousal maintenance. If not, then if it's already being paid and there's regularity, they can see it being paid. There are some lenders who consider taking that's off. But it is challenging in those circumstances. And quite often there is, in the background, there is unsecured debt with either one or the other that needs to be dealt with. And that, one way or another, reduces the amount they've got to walk with.
And when working out finances, that's all taken into account, is it?
It's all taken into account, especially, if they're going to have child maintenance as well, that will need to be taken into account. If husband or let's say husband or wife, whoever's the main person or the absent parent, they are they have to pay out child maintenance for the children, and they still want to borrow money to finance their own mortgage. The problem is that affordability may be reduced because they're having to pay child maintenance. The opposite way with regard to the receiving party, I think it's got to be regular, hasn't it? But so that they take that into consideration with regard to borrowing for a mortgage capacity. But I'm not the specialist.
Yeah, that's a mortgage capacity report, isn't it? I think.
Well, yes, a mortgage capacity report. It's an assessment done on somebody's assets as well, but mostly income and expenditure, their situation and their ability to get the mortgage they might want. And it's a report that's done separately for the benefit of the solicitor and the court if necessary.
Is that quite
It's-
expensive to do?
Not overly, no. If you look around, there are very varying fees for doing that sort of work. We charge for a single report, we charge £245, which is certainly less than a number of providers out there. But we know there's an amount of work that needs to be done because we have to do a fairly in-depth fact find with the client for that. And it's virtually the same fact find we would need to do as if we were doing the mortgage.
Right. And how can a settlement agreement affect how much you could borrow?
Well, I guess from your point of view, once you've got that enables you to get the settlement agreement either between yourself and the other side solicitor, or if necessary, going to court and arguing the point.
Yeah, so obviously they would need sufficient money from that settlement.
Yeah.
In order to put it, they need a large deposit, especially a wife. So with regard to the split, sometimes it's 70-40, 70-30 from the property, so that they know that they've got enough to, especially if they're selling.
Is that the
property.
court making that decision? Is that
The courts don't make the decision
something you agree?
unless. So what happens? We have 3 different hearings: an FDA, an FDR, and at the FDR, hopefully we're negotiating to try and reach a settlement.
Right.
And most times, the parties will reach an agreement at that hearing. However, and you have an indication from the judge as to which way they're thinking, their thought process as to how that should be operated or distributed.
What sort of things does that take
If
into
the
account?
courts, the judge may say, well, no, wife has got children, and therefore that she needs a roof. The children need a roof over their heads, and therefore she needs a little bit more than husband, because husband will say no, 50-50. Well, no, it's not going to be 50-50 if wife is at home or on a low income.
Yeah.
And therefore she needs a little bit more to rehouse. There is also something called a Misha order, where both parties cannot afford to come off the mortgage, and therefore one party needs to stay in the property.
Right.
Stays in the property, and it's either she or he will continue to pay the mortgage, or both parties continue to pay the mortgage until a triggering event occurs.
And then to necessitate that, you can change that from a capital and interest repayment to just an interest only?
That could be challenging,
Right.
because both parties are still party to the mortgage. So both parties had to agree with anything that's going to be changed about the mortgage. It might be possible to reduce the payments by turning it into an interest-only mortgage. There's a few lenders that will consider that. By and large, lenders are not keen on moving from repayment to interest only, but if there are reasons for it, and especially if you can see what the outcome is at the other end.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty is a lot of lenders for interest only mortgages have quite definite criteria, such as a minimum equity left in the property and minimum incomes, and for a lot of people they don't fit, at least not for the larger high street lenders. So that's where we would talk to other lenders who are not so well known locally.
And what about so that's if you've got children, you've got young families. What about older divorcing couples? You were saying before, we were having a little chat before.
Oh yeah,
you're starting to see a bit more. I don't know if you're seeing that. Actually.
Unfortunately, there's still the years. It's not good when you see someone walking in the door. You think they're supposed to be retiring and going on cruises and etc. And they walk in and say, "I need a divorce. My husband wants to leave, or she wants to leave because she's had enough." Yeah. But you're having to deal with that. And sometimes they've got sufficient money and some haven't.
Yeah.
And they're having to deal with their pensions as well as the mortgage, now having to refinance and get a new mortgage in their sole name, and whether they have the money to do so. And I suppose that's where you come in with these equity release, etc., and all sorts of things.
It includes equity release as a generic term, if you like. Equity release. The products available within equity release are normally lifetime mortgages and reversions, and we don't really deal with reversions. It's a tiny part of the market, and they work in a rather different way. If it absolutely needs to be that for some reason, then we can consider that. But a lifetime mortgage is just a mortgage that you don't make payments on. The basic version is. So there's no affordability calculation. Because there's no affordability calculation, because you're not making payments, it's available to people who don't have to demonstrate an income.
So it's just based on the value of the property and equity.
Yes, and the age of the client.
Right.
So the older the client, the larger maximum amount they can get on the property, because that mortgage is just going to roll up. The interest rolls up over time until they leave the property, until they go into full-time care, or until they die.
Does that mean the mortgage company then owns the property at the end of it?
No, it's a mortgage.
Okay.
A reversion, that is the issues with reversions.
Right. The
potential for litigation with the estate and afterwards is quite high.
Yeah.
Because you're selling all or part of your property to a company in return for a lump sum. The lump sum you're getting is not the value of the property that you're selling. It's a percentage of that. And then that's it. You've got it until, again, you die. And then that company now owns the property. And they're banking on the fact that it's increased in value over time as well as the amount of equity they had at the beginning.
So how do they, so if someone wanted to buy someone out, so the wife wants to stay in the property.
Mortgage, yes, it's possible to do that with a lifetime mortgage. It's also possible to provide a lifetime mortgage to the person leaving the property. And sometimes, if there's sufficient funds available, that can be done as well. With a lifetime mortgage, you're not going to get maximum loan to values like 90% mortgages on that. But you don't, normally you wouldn't want to at those ages. No. But that's part of it. And then the other part of it is for people that do have an income in retirement, a visible income in retirement, there's retirement interest earning mortgages as well. So for people that have pension income and can manage a certain amount of mortgage, then you can provide a retirement interest earning mortgage, which is an interest only mortgage that just goes on until you leave the property or until you die as well.
What other things should people be considering? They're thinking about getting divorced.
So it's not just one thing, but the main thing is, can I afford? What can I afford? How is it going to be split?
Yeah.
Will it be 50-50? Can I get more out of this? Or, am I going to be homeless? There's various things.
Yeah.
There's various things. Yeah. I don't know if you can add anything more to that.
No, I mean, it is important that they're realistic. I've got 2 cases at the moment which are both involved selling the property. It's not possible for the lady who might like to stay in the property, the wife. It's not possible. She has a low income. It's just not feasible at all. And he has already left, so he's not coming back to the property. So it needs to be sold to provide enough of a lump sum for her for a deposit for a smaller property. A downsizing is being realistic. Yeah. I have another case where the property is about to be sold, and again, they've agreed settlement figures on that. And in this case, I'm dealing with the husband, who will have one of the children living with him most of the time. But these are teenage children. And he's been realistic. He's downsizing. This is a much smaller property he's going for, but he was realistic from the outset. And he said, this is all I need at the moment. So you do have to be real. You do sometimes have to be realistic.
You do have to be.
Just the amount of time that the children spend with a parent, that affects the child maintenance, does it?
It will do. I always tell people to go on to the child maintenance service calculator and work that out.
Right.
Because the more time they spend with dad or mum, the absent parent, the less money you possibly will get from, to look after the children.
Yeah. And if you're drawing down money out of your property, that can probably affect your benefits as well, can't it?
If you're on means-tested benefits, it's going to be complex. Because if you're on means-tested benefits and you're going through a divorce, and if you're the party who's left the home, then you're going to end up receiving a lump of money. And that can mess things up. Well, hopefully, or some money,
Yeah.
I would think. And that can mess things up for the means tested benefits. For the person staying in the property, not so much, but their means tested benefits can be taken into account with a mortgage if it's necessary. But as we said, often it's just not possible for either party to take it on. I have one of my cases at the moment, about 30% of the income is universal credit, and this lender will accept universal credit as part of his income in the affordability calculation. It's always a case-by-case basis. There's not one answer that works for everybody, but in this case we can use that. It's a lower loan to value. So yeah, we can use that. And there is also, sometimes there's also additional income for children because they have special needs.
Okay.
And there can be extra funds coming in from DWP.
So if someone was considering getting divorced, then who's the best person to speak to first? Is it better to sort of understand what your finances might be, or is it better to understand
I think they come to us so that we can assess the whole picture, take into consideration everything, so that we can give them the advice. I would always direct a party to go to mediation if they're able to talk and there is no domestic violence involved. So I would always say to parties, look, if you want to keep money in your pockets, go along and speak to a mediator, and both of you sit down and try and work this out. If you can work it out and you've got proposals, you can then go back to your respective solicitors, and then we can, if you've got something in writing and both parties still want to sign up to it, then we can incorporate it into a consent order and lodge it with the necessary forms and for a judge to review. And it's not right when I always tell them it's not rubber stamped. So yes, that's a position. And if they need mortgage advice before they make those decisions, then they go off and speak to a mortgage advisor.
So do you see couples quite regularly?
Both sides?
Yeah.
Infrequently. One of the cases I have at the moment, I was introduced to the husband by the wife who's already left the property and said, would you talk to my husband about mortgage options? But that's because this is not an acrimonious divorce. They've agreed a lot of stuff between them. Yeah. They don't want to argue about it. They've just decided they're both happy with what's fair. And so that was quite straightforward. Yeah. I imagine eventually I'll be looking after whatever her needs are with regard to property going forward, but that's not going to happen just yet. But sometimes it's quite difficult to be an advisor for both parties, sometimes because there's a perception of a conflict of interest.
There is something now, the courts are expecting us to send parties off to get a mortgage.
Yes.
Their borrowing capacity.
Yes. And they like a joint one.
Still haven't got my head around that one.
I've had different conversations with people about that, and I've felt in the past that there's a perceived conflict. One party is not going to be happy disclosing all this information if I'm also dealing with that party. And am I going to be skewed in favour of one party or the other? Well, no, because I have to do those reports.
So they pay you together as well, do they?
Yeah. It would be if it was a joint report, we discount it to a degree. If we were doing a joint report, and the courts do prefer joint arrangement. They do prefer mediation, don't they? And that's
it. It's mediation, borrowing capacity, but a lot of solicitors are still doing these single ones. But then you've got to explain why you've not done a joint one. Right. So I just wondered.
We have to walk carefully and make sure people understand. And when I do a mortgage capacity report, I'm not doing it as that person's advisor. I'm not their mortgage advisor. I'm supposed to be standing apart as if you like, an independent expert and producing a report on their borrowing potential capacity. And the same for the other person. So if they, after that, if either or both of them choose to use me to arrange a new mortgage for them, all well and good. But that part of it is not as their advisor, and I have to explain that to them at the beginning.
Do they produce the Form E that they've completed so that you can actually prepare that document, or is it?
Do they?
Because they
For
complete
me.
it for me, which is the financial statement setting out all their assets, income, liabilities, etc. What information do they give you, or is it they just come along to you? This is my position. If they were doing a joint borrowing capacity,
Yeah.
they would just come along to you, provide the information.
I would imagine I would need all the information you would have on that, but
This is a bit
I would mostly start again
Just a
from
fact
scratch.
find
So
with them.
it's a fact
Right.
find. It's a
Okay.
complete fact find,
Well, that's-
and it's pretty much as much of a fact find, not quite, but almost as much of a fact find as I would do if I was advising on the mortgage, because I need to know fairly in depth about their income and their outgoings and any borrowing they've got.
Yeah.
As well, sometimes as well as assets as well, because that makes a difference as to what might happen further down the road. For instance, if it's an interest-only mortgage that we're looking at, possibly as a possibility, with the option of paying that down further down the road using a lump sum from a pension. Which is not my favourite way of doing it,
No.
but sometimes that's what needs to be done. It's what the lender will accept as a repayment option. What the client ultimately does during that period is something different. And if it's over 10 years, that mortgage is likely to change in 10 years anyway. The client may be paying it down over that period of time, which will reduce the outstanding amounts. They may have other things that are going to come into play during that time, which will help them pay it down. Or they might just move again. So it's about, part of this is understanding what lenders will accept to fit their criteria, as well as what is possible for the client.
Super. Well, hopefully that's been interesting for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank
Your
you.
time, Richard.